If you have gigawatts of Bitcoin mining hardware plugged in our grid all over our grid, and you're able to manage those different pieces of hardware in a way to disrupt the grid, that could be a major national security problem for the United States. A lot of the other people that care about Bitcoin do not want to see Bitcoin be excluded from that crypto tax package. We have this big problem where, 97% of these machines are coming from China. That's a really big problem from a supply chain perspective. The other big problem here is a huge national security risk from the idea of these Bitcoin mining hardware pieces being shipped with backdoors, being shipped with kill switches.
Hello, and welcome back to the Daily Stack. We are live. It's a fun one. We're giving away Bitcoin. We're talking Bitcoin with one of the most prominent Bitcoin policy experts in the world. We've got Mr. Dennis Porter with us. How are you today, Dennis?
I'm doing great. What an introduction. Pumped to be here, ready for the show.
Absolutely. And then we got my co-host today, Jody. How you doing, Jody?
We're doing good. It's been a long week. Been battling the flu, but a lot of good things on the horizon. We've got a lot of stuff cooking for Bitcoin Vegas coming up. Bitcoin is for everyone. So, Dennis, I didn't know I know you're going to make that in the Pacific Northwest, hopefully. And we're excited.
Yeah, well, I moved to DC, so it'll be a little bit bigger of a trip for me this time than driving right down the road. But love those guys over at Bitcoin is for everyone. They do amazing work.
So you live in DC full time now?
Yeah, moved here in November. We had a lot of success with all the state bills that we were doing, and I started to show up in DC a little bit more often in the last year or so. I mean, I've been coming over here for 4 years now, but in the last year, I really started to spend quite a bit more time working with staffers and members in Congress. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that labor with Mind in America. But this is just the beginning. We already have another piece of legislation we're working on getting introduced, and we are also in research mode for a couple other concepts that we're very excited about.
Nice. So we've got lots of policy news to dive into, but just before we get started, I want to give a little shout out. We are over on YouTube. Head up to youtube.com/dailystacklive. Join the community there. We're 340 or so subscribers strong, building that up. Want to get people watching us live over on YouTube, which is awesome. Please join us there. And then, of course, we're giving away Bitcoin. So go to 21rates.com/stack today. Use the code word USA in honor of all the work that Dennis is doing in our nation's capital. Type that code word in USA and you get your chance to win 21,000 sats. All right. So now, Dennis, talk to us. You have been instrumental in working with a lot of these states on their strategic Bitcoin reserve bills, as well as the right to self-custody, the right to mine. It's been an up and down, it seems, policy world with Bitcoin. Last year started off so hot, and now there was a little bit of a lull, but now it seems like we're back a bit. There's a bunch of bills coming through. Clarity Act is up in the air. What is your current take on the state of Bitcoin in DC at this moment?
Well, personally, let's put the market structure bill aside and whether or not that passes. I think a lot of Senate offices are feeling optimistic about it, getting it across the finish line. We feel that there's still very good odds that it could pass. But putting that aside, I feel very, very incredibly optimistic about the future of Bitcoin and digital asset policy in Congress. The meetings that we're having, the conversations we're having, we are able to really help educate these offices on the opportunity and build these incredible relationships along the way. I think people oftentimes forget how important it is that you have strong relationships with the various staff members, the office members, and working out policy through those relationships has proven to be very productive for us. And a lot of offices, they're wanting to work on this type of policy, but it's about finding the right fit. And that's one of the specialties at Satoshi Action is, we are sort of a choose your own adventure policy shop. We help to research, we help to craft ideas, we help to craft language, and we help to try to pass those pieces of legislation into law. But it's not about like, oh, hey, this is what we want, this is what you should do. Certainly we present all of our ideas, but we're also willing to take ideas that come from these congressional offices and work towards those objectives. Oftentimes one of the big problems in Congress is they're so focused on whatever is the thing that is happening right now. What are they all focused on right now? And that's clarity, that's market structure. But a lot of them want to start working on these future policy initiatives. and they just don't have the bandwidth or the capacity. I mean, I was just meeting on the Hill today with some Senate staff, and it was like, they're just so deep in the weeds on market structure that they don't have the ability to quite look around the corner on what is next. And so what Satoshi Action is able to do is we are able to go and skate where the puck is going, which is try to find those next pieces of policy that we're going to work on. Of course, de minimis for Bitcoin and digital asset transactions is important. That's nothing new. We'll be working on that. But Mind in America is one of those concepts that we're going to be working on, and there are two other ones which I wish I could talk a little bit more about. But they are in one of them hasn't quite been made public yet, and the other one is in research mode. But we're very excited about working on the future of Bitcoin policy and digital asset policy here in Capitol Hill.
We'd love to get into, I think for our audience, it's always good to educate. Let's not assume, that they have a good finger on the pulse of everything that's happening with the Clarity Act. Tell us about what has been ruffling the feathers the most with Bitcoiners when it comes to de minimis tax exemption in somewhat of like a layman's terms of, how is I think different lobbyists, there's been pushback on Coinbase. I know Marty Bent has been very vocal against Coinbase. What's been changing that suddenly has, people's like hair in the back of their neck standing up if they've been on the Bitcoin side of like, this is not the bill that we've been pushing for, the last couple months?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think the big concern is that if you create a de minimis or just general crypto tax package, and in the de minimis component or the de minimis section of that tax package, if there's only a de minimis for stable coins, that's going to be a major problem that I think is going to cause a lot of people, not just the Bitcoiners, by the way, but the other L1 folks as well. This is an Ethereum problem, this is a Solana problem, this is a Bitcoin problem, and I think myself and a lot of the other people that care about Bitcoin do not want to see Bitcoin be excluded from that crypto tax package, which is probably only going to happen I wouldn't say one time, but it'll be a little bit of while before it's revisited. Like typically for your listeners to understand is that when you work on this type of policy, you usually only get one shot every like 5, maybe 10 years. So if we don't get de minimis now with Bitcoin alongside a stablecoin de minimis or some other type of approach for stablecoins, we might have to wait a very, very long time to have this be revisited. So that's a very big concern. I think also there's concerns about the mining and the staking provision on how we treat those that revenue when it comes in. Is it treated like discovered property, like if you find gold, or is it treated like a commodity like corn when you harvest it? You don't get taxed when you harvest the corn, right? You get taxed when you sell the corn. And so I think myself included and many others believe that Bitcoin should be treated that same way. It should have that same tax treatment. A lot of folks, and I agree with I agree with the policy thesis around it, believe that should also apply for staking rewards. But in some pieces of legislation that are out there, they just do the staking component. They don't do the mining component, which that's also going to be something that causes that that hair to stand up on the neck of a lot of people in the Bitcoin space, because I don't think we want to wait a decade. If these bills pass into law that don't have the Bitcoin component to it, we all don't want to wait a decade to have to revisit these kind of components.
And just for some clarification, so the tax exemption de minimis is part of the Parity Act, correct?
The stable,
and that is,
you're talking about the stablecoin provision, the one that's exclusive to stablecoins.
And so is that the one where Bitcoin would be excluded if it wasn't? Because Bitcoin Policy Institute put out a post. They said that Bitcoin's being excluded from here. Stable coins are getting the de minimis, but Bitcoin is not. And this is where the double taxation comes in too. So is that the law that we need to focus on to get the de minimis fixed for Bitcoin? Is the Parity Act, correct? And that's still in draft.
Sure. Fixed, you could say. I think also there just needs to be a new template or a new piece of legislation introduced. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not too upset about it. At the end of the day, this is Washington, D.C., this is Congress. It's very hard to move legislation here. So my theory on, after meeting with many different offices and having these conversations, is that the reason why they have slimmed this thing down to just be stable coins, just be staking, is because it's more politically viable. So it's Congress. It's not always like people are trying to get you. Sometimes they are, but they're not always out to get you. And in this situation, I believe that it is the strategy to pursue the low-hanging fruit, things that are easy to accomplish, because there has been quite a bit of, I wouldn't say resistance, but certainly concern around different designs on how we actually implement a de minimis, for everything from enforcement to actually fixing the problem, and the problem being that when I go buy a cup of coffee, I shouldn't have to track my basis, record the transaction, and then pay 5 cent capital gains on that transaction. I should be able to go buy a cup of coffee and not have to do all of that extra work. And that's what they call in the tax space simplification. You want to simplify the tax code for the actual taxpayer, and also because there's a huge amount of tracking and everything that goes over to the IRS and all the paperwork that they have to do. So there is a time and cost savings to the IRS and various agencies when they don't have to have 50,000 or think about the whole country, right? Like you could have hundreds of thousands of these tiny transactions, maybe millions of these tiny transactions taking place, and the IRS is having to go through all the paperwork, track and make sure everything happened. So there is a resource savings as well for the IRS that takes place. But I do believe that we need something new, something fresh on de minimis. This is definitely something that Satoshi Action is working on, TBD on those details. But the basic premise is that we need to be able to accomplish the enforcement component, making it easy and simple to understand, but also the simplification component. And right now, with the current proposals that have been put out there that have been introduced, I have seen, and we're putting parity aside because this is irrelevant for parity because that just covers stablecoins. But any proposal I've seen, any legislation I've seen that covers de minimis for broad digital asset transactions, including Bitcoin, they have had one or maybe two problems. And typically the problem that I see that arises the most is that it doesn't actually achieve simplification. The reason I say that is because if you say like, okay, we're going to have a $300 transaction, it's based on basis. You can have up to a $300 capital gains exemption based on basis. You have to track your basis. You have to report your basis. You have to go in and you have to see when you spent it, how you spent it. You have to still do all this reporting. So you get this sort of like win where people feel that they have achieved something, but at what cost? Because if you're going in and you're saying, hey, okay, all right, I got 5,000, and the problem is they put the cap in place. I should definitely highlight that component. Revisiting the current proposals, it's based on basis, which you'll have to track, and then there's usually like a $5,000 cap, or there's some sort of dollar cap on how much you can do per year. The basic premise is like they don't want people living on this, all year round, spending everything they have and avoiding capital gains altogether. So they put some sort of $5,000 cap. So you might be able to do $300 per transaction on a de minimis exemption, but you get a total of $5,000 for the year. And so that requires all this sort of tracking and tracing, and that's really what creates this huge burden still on the taxpayer. It doesn't really achieve simplification. And some Bitcoiners might be like, well, that's fine, because at least I can still get my de minimis exemption, but the problem is not actually with the users, although I don't think that that's the right call for the users. The problem is in Congress, because we're going around and telling everybody, this is for simplification. This is to improve simplification for the taxpayer. It's to improve the simplification on how paperwork is done at the IRS. But if you have a $300 basis and a $5,000 cap, you're still doing all the tracking and recording and reporting. So there is no simplification, which people in Congress, you have a wide degree of folks that are incredibly brilliant, but nobody's an idiot here in Congress. They're going to see that and they're going to go, well, your argument is simplification, but this bill doesn't achieve that. So what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. And that's the problem that we're facing persistently in Capitol Hill. And this is why I think we need a total rewrite and rebuild of the way that we think about de minimis and the way that it's structured, while also including the mining, the staking, the stablecoin provisions. We also need to get a fix on the qualified appraisals. Right now, this is crazy. If you donate $5,000 in Bitcoin or more to any nonprofit, or anyone really, you are required to get a qualified appraisal of that Bitcoin. You have to go hire someone to say, okay, this is what your Bitcoin was worth at the time you did it. Totally unnecessary. They don't do this for securities, and it's even less necessary for Bitcoin because there's a 24/7, 365 super liquid global market that shows you exactly what the price was. Now you can maybe go to like different exchanges and the price will be a few dollars different, but generally speaking, you absolutely do not need a qualified appraisal for anything to do with Bitcoin donations or any digital asset donation, unless it's like an NFT, right? Because that's more like art, and that's the point of a qualified appraisal. When you donate a piece of art, nobody really knows what the value of that art is, so you need to get a qualified appraisal. If you donate a Rembrandt, you're going to have some guy come in and say, okay, this thing is worth XYZ dollars. Mm-hmm. You do not need that for Bitcoin. You do not need that for most cryptocurrencies. Maybe you still need it for NFTs or other types of sort of art-related types of technologies. but definitely something that should be included in the tax package to make sure that we're really cleaning things up and we don't have to wait and revisit these things in a decade.
Understood. Well, we definitely need to dive deep into your Mind in America Act, because that's some big news that you come out with. But first, I want to talk about a quick win that we just had. Kentucky thought that, there was some language and a law that was going to come up that would have banned self-custody, right? But so the Blockchain Policy Institute is urging Kentucky lawmakers to remove a last-minute amendment to House Bill 380 that would force hardware wallet providers to reset user credentials, calling it technologically impossible and harmful to self-custody. Well, you just came out and you said, hey, this backdoor ban on Bitcoin self-custody has officially been defeated in Kentucky. Did you have anything to do with this? And how was it changed? Do you know?
Certainly, we played a role. It was changed in the Senate. So House Bill 380 was originally a crypto ATM bill. There's a huge effort across the country to get these crypto ATM regulatory packages passed into law, something that Satoshi Action spends quite a bit of time on. We believe is super important because we don't just view ourselves as, hey, let's go do these amazing pro-innovation policies, which we work on. We also want to make sure that consumers and users are protected and that we are operating in an environment where there are guardrails in place when and where necessary. And a big reason why we do that is because we believe there needs to be more trust, more public trust in Bitcoin and digital assets. Public trust in crypto and Bitcoin writ large is at an all-time low. If you walk into a bar room and you say, hi, I work in the crypto space or the Bitcoin space, like it used to be people would be like, oh, that's cool, that's interesting. Now most people are like, oh, you're crazy and you must be like a huge Trump MAGA guy, regardless of your like political opinions. Like that's just sort of like the response that you get. Now, some people might like that you're a pro-Trump guy in that instance, but generally speaking, like people don't view Bitcoin for what it is. They don't view digital assets for what they are and the opportunity that they provide. They sort of just view it through this very like political lens, and they view it through that like a lot of scams and frauds happen in the digital asset space. And so these crypto ATM packages are a way to help mitigate a significant amount of the fraud that is taking place, which is typically directed at elders, which is a major problem. So within this crypto ATM bill, which was introduced, another lawmaker who had another bill that wasn't going anywhere, in the last hours of it being in the House, tacked on some of his language. So there's another bill that was already out there, and he tacked on his language onto this bill right at the last moment, slipped it under the gun, and they passed it in the House, and it went over to the Senate, where fortunately, because of the activity and the pushback from the community writ large, a lot of different groups pushed back, including Ledger played a major role. I think they deserve a lot of credit. Young Americans for Liberty actually played a role as well. They deserve some credit. Also, T.J. Roberts, who importantly passed the bill HB 701 last year, which actually protects the right to self-custody. So he played a role talking to his colleagues. And importantly, kind of going back to that HB 701 from last year in Kentucky, this new bill, HB 380, with Section 33, would have conflicted with the prior law. So even if it had passed, Satoshi Action feels confident, I feel confident that it would have went to the courts and a decision would have been made that would have ruled in our favor, ruled in the favor of protecting the right to self-custody, which is also why it's so important. If you go back and you look at why we do what we do at Satoshi Action, it's so important to pass proactive legislation. If you're always just playing defense all the time, you're always on your back foot and you're always in a bad position. But if you pass this proactive legislation that says we are enshrining into law the right to self-custody, the right to run a node, the right to peer-to-peer transactions, when future legislative efforts are attempted, they can be thwarted. And so that's definitely something to highlight. And Representative Roberts there in Kentucky was a big part of passing the Bitcoin rights bill into law, which protected the right to self-custody last year, and also played a role in helping to push back on this dangerous provision that was in there this year. But we are very excited that it was pulled out. The Senate, as they were going through their process, pulled that aggressive anti-self-custody language out of the bill and instead just put some disclosure components, which simply say that these wallet providers have to do what most of them already do, which is like, how do you do your backups? How do you like operate these wallets? Now you're just legally required to do that. But I personally wouldn't buy a wallet that doesn't allow me or educate me on how to back up my own self-custody wallet.
Yeah. On the mining side, miners have always battled with energy perception, environmentalism on passing anything. What has been your take on the shift of HPC and AI companies coming in and running very similar power-intensive processes? Largest company in the world, NVIDIA, is now in your corner in a sense of like enabling power. You suddenly have strategic importance of having data centers in the U.S. I know that there was Bitmain miners that were right next to a government facility that like suddenly raised red flags, and the government didn't like that. But there's suddenly an importance of having really good power, access to power. It's going to drive up prices on the grid. Constituents aren't going to love that. But there's a strategic element now of America being able to be competitive in the AI race. How does this change kind of how you approach, okay, let's get the miners on board with anything that NVIDIA might or some of these hyperscalers might want to push forward?
Yes, so there's certainly potential for like a political constituency to be built. We're definitely always favorable towards working alongside groups that are not, necessarily in the Bitcoin space. There's certainly going to be those opportunities for that on policy, where there's a lot of crossover between digital assets, Bitcoin, and AI, and the future of how we, really secure this country and make sure that we thwart some of the worst possible outcomes from artificial intelligence. And we're deep in research mode on those types of projects. But as it pertains to sort of like the energy component and how much energy is being used, there is a clear, big, massive difference between Bitcoin mining and something like artificial intelligence, or these GPUs that are being used, or any other compute that's being used for people to use Claude, for people to use ChatGPT, and that is that Bitcoin miners can play a significant role in balancing the grid, in mitigating methane emissions, and also supporting clean energy. There are things that artificial intelligence data centers could do as well, but they just don't even, they pale in comparison to what can be done with Bitcoin mining. We have done a significant body of research in this field. I would say that we are probably, close to the top when it comes to understanding how to talk about Bitcoin mining and its crossover with energy, and also understanding the potential positive impacts on the grid and on our energy and environmental systems. And that's a big part of like why this Mind in America legislation is so important, because for one, we have this big problem where 97% of these machines are coming from China. That's a really big problem from a supply chain perspective. If we ever have export controls, if we ever have another global pandemic, you name it, in any situation where supply chains can be disrupted, it would be very incredibly problematic for US miners to no longer have access to the latest, greatest digital asset Bitcoin mining hardware, because they are plugged into gigawatts of power. And if 4 years go by and they can't get any new machines, those businesses could go out of business. They could become uneconomical, and the power contracts that they have would no longer be, they would never longer be able to purchase the power, and that would have cascading downstream effects, negative effects on local ratepayers and local infrastructure. When you have one of your largest buyers of power just completely leave or go out of business, then the costs that they were absorbing get distributed to the ratepayers. The other big problem here is a huge, huge national security risk from the idea of these Bitcoin mining hardware pieces being shipped with backdoors, being shipped with kill switches. This is an area where there is a lot of Senate interest. There's a lot of congressional interest, and it's not it's not fantasy land too. They've done this before. So Antbleed back in 2017, there was a back door that was inside the Bitmain hardware. I know because I was mining at the time, and it was a huge story in the Bitcoin space and in the Bitcoin mining space. So this has happened. DHS has also been investigating some of the major producers through Operation Red Sunset, and they were stopping a lot of the machines at the border. And we know this because we also played a role in helping to solve that problem, because we were like, what the hell is going on here? We helped get a lot of machines unlocked because they were trying to go through them and determine, do these machines have kill switches in them? Do they have some sort of backdoor ability to control the systems? And that's a big problem, because if you have gigawatts of Bitcoin mining hardware plugged in our grid, all over our grid, and you're able to manage those different pieces of hardware in a way to disrupt the grid, that could be a major national security problem for the United States, a major strategic advantage to China, who is our most competitive foreign adversary. We have lots of foreign adversaries. Some of them probably we like less, like North Korea. But North Korea is not a real threat to us, other than maybe hacking us and stealing our cryptocurrency and threatening us every once in a while that they might launch a nuke. But as someone who could really, like, if we go to toe-to-toe, if we enter an open conflict environment, or we enter some sort of sort of hot war, like China could be a threat. North Korea is not a threat. That's not a problem for us whatsoever. And so if you're thinking about how we can have overmatch and how we can talk about our competitiveness from a military perspective, you have to think about grid security, because grid security is national security, commonly said here in Washington, D.C. If your grid can be disrupted in the middle of a war, like that's going to be hugely problematic, especially if those digital asset mining hardware installations are around critical pieces of infrastructure. So eliminating that problem by getting more U.S. manufacturing, more U.S. mining hardware is going to be huge, and I think that's what's going to draw a lot of lawmakers in. In fact, we just saw a bill in the House, and there's a Senate companion bill coming which addresses this problem from a different angle. So this is something that lawmakers are deeply concerned with, especially people that sit on intel, that can go into the SCIF, especially people that are sitting on armed services that understand the gravity of the situation. We have to really solve this problem. But tying back to the energy side of things, that's the like sort of like big problem. But the really interesting thing about this legislation is it doesn't just come down with a heavy hammer and say, hey, we're going to ban Chinese hardware. It creates a very virtuous loop of positive incentives where if you shift away from Chinese hardware over a 4-year period and you enter the program, you become a certified miner day one when you stop buying Chinese hardware. Year one, you have 25% less Chinese hardware. Year two, it's 50. Year three, you're 4 years in now, but you remove all your Chinese hardware. If you do this great thing where you not only remove this national security threat, but you are buying and helping to onshore a new manufacturing of digital asset mining hardware, you can get access to several DOE programs, things like DOE Title 17, which is a loan guarantee program that is set up for different types of approaches to building energy, to carbon emissions or emissions reduction, where if you also are doing a good thing, then you can get these loan guarantees. Well, we already know that Bitcoin miners are doing good things for the grid. We already know that they're balancing the grid, mitigating methane emissions, and helping to support clean energy. So if you stop buying Chinese hardware, eliminate a national security threat, you get access to programs where they encourage you to do positive behavior, and we get a more secure grid, a cleaner grid, and less methane, and a more resilient grid. So it's this very much looks like virtuous loop of all of these things tied together that I think will drive very positive outcomes for the country. And as we talk to a lot of Senate offices, it clicks for them. Even people who don't like Bitcoin are like, yeah, this makes sense actually.
And do you think that there might be a concern of getting too much hash rate within America, having it too concentrated within one jurisdiction?
I mean, I think if we were living in China under an authoritarian regime, I would definitely be concerned. We have very strong property rights here. It's less of a concern for me. And when I think about the United States, I actually think of it as like sort of a conglomeration of like 50 small countries, because we have 50 states and they all operate very independently. So that is very much not a concern for me. It'd be like if you went over to Europe and you're like, well, are you worried that Europe has too much hash rate? I'm like, no, because there's like so many different countries there that all have diverse like political points, opinions. So yeah, would I want 100% being here? Probably not. But I wouldn't mind a little bit more growth in that space, especially as we start to think about proof of work and its sort of applications to the military, and making sure that we have overmatch and access to block space at any given time. That's going to be critically important for the future of our country.
Absolutely right. Block space will be a commodity that nation states need to be able to access. And so having hash rate within your jurisdiction allows that to be possible. So I think you're right. It is important that a certain percentage remains within this country at all times. All right. Well, Dennis, that was a tour de force. Thank you so much for getting us up to date on all of these policy measures when it comes to Bitcoin in America. And up next, we'd like to have a little fun on our Friday stack. And so we do a Mount Rushmore competition. We're going to be talking about the biggest announcements in Bitcoin history. Everybody loves this segment. It's going to be very, very fun. But before we get to that, we got to give a shout out to our good friends over at Rhino. Rhino is one of the best places to go out and get your Bitcoin. Why? Because historically, getting Bitcoin financial services was slow, clunky, and scattered across all these different platforms. Well, Rhino is changing that by bringing them all together. A next generation Bitcoin banking app designed to handle all of your Bitcoin needs in one place. buy Bitcoin there, make payments over the Lightning Network, send cash globally over Bitcoin rails, and of course, you can DCA, set up automatic savings so you stack sats on your schedule and build wealth over time. Soon, you'll be able to pay bills, direct deposit, borrow against your Bitcoin, and save for retirement all within the same app. And of course, security is a top priority. So go today to rhinobitcoin.com, download the app, and use the code Bitcoin News. That's one word, Bitcoin News, and you'll get $10 of Bitcoin dropped right into your account just for getting started. And I would also like to highlight the fact that they have a new game that is out that we got to share this one, and it's called Sats Drop. Every single day you get over there and you got a chance to win up to 10,000 sats per drop. You just hold down this button, you drop a Plinko ball, and you get a chance to win up to 10,000 sats per drop, 3 drops per day. Just sign up, use your email, get in here, and you get free Bitcoin. We always need more free Bitcoin, right? So head over to satsdrop.com. That is drop.rhinobitcoin.com to participate. All right, everybody, let's get into our game for today. And that, of course, is the Friday Stacks Mount Rushmore biggest Bitcoin announcements of all time. So we briefed Dennis on how this game works. It is a snake draft. We are going to go through and say what we think are the biggest announcements that have been made in Bitcoin history. And Dennis, you get to pick one of one. What do you think is the biggest announcement of all time in Bitcoin?
Before I choose, one quick question. If I pick something, can the other person pick the same thing?
No.
Oh, you can lock it in.
Yes.
Wow. Well, I'd have to probably put the El Salvador announcement as number one then.
Nice.
Bitcoin legal tender and also requiring folks to accept Bitcoin and creating a Bitcoin reserve. I mean, how do you beat that, right? And they were so far ahead of
Very hard to beat. Yeah. 2021, it feels like ancient history now, right? But it was also the way the announcement was made too. It was at the conference. Jack Mallers on stage. He was crying. It was so emotional. The fact that he helped a nation state turn Bitcoin on as legal tender. Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to announcements, it's very, very hard to beat that one because just the vibes are so high at that conference. You know, Bitcoin was around $50,000 for the first time. Everybody was finally able to get outside for the first time during COVID and meet together in Florida. And so there was just an amalgamation of all this great energy that really made that announcement so special. So that was definitely on my list, and you picked a good one there. Nice. Good pick.
Coming up second, we got in Bitcoin Nashville 2024, Donald Trump, strategic reserve. There's a lot we could discuss afterwards about how that has really not come into fruition in the same way that we expected. But the fact that we were talking about it, the fact that you had RFK, at the conference, the fact you had Donald Trump at the conference, potentially Elon flying by and tracking his jet, and he was going to stop in and join Donald Trump on stage to announce a new regime of Bitcoin friendliness. The fact that all of that happened, I think, was a very pivotal moment. How it's played out, Dennis, would love your take on just strategic reserve, just not playing out how people thought. But the fact that they were even talking about it from like the person that ended up being, president of the United States right after that, I think was very monumental.
Well, I wouldn't give up hope on the legislative effort. Obviously, we did see it enacted via executive order, and there is additional legislative efforts. In fact, we didn't get to cover this in Mind in America, but there's a part in there where it codifies the strategic Bitcoin reserve. It also codifies the digital asset stockpile, which is important because you can stake the digital assets and you can use that revenue to buy Bitcoin for the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which would create the first ever budget neutral approach to buying Bitcoin at the federal level. That's in Mind in America, and we're really proud to see that was included.
Yeah, I think it's important. Would love to get the audit, especially after the operation that they did with the Prince Group and being able to seize that Bitcoin from that horrible operation that was happening over there in Cambodia. I mean, that could have doubled the amount of Bitcoin that America has right now. So still waiting on that audit. But I mean, to go from 200 to 300,000 Bitcoin plus is quite the move here. So it's clear that they care about this Bitcoin and that it is of strategic importance for this nation. And yeah, we'd love to hear more out of DC about that. Cool. All right. My pick, I mean, you guys just left this on the dinner table right here. Of course, it is the Halloween 2008 announcement of Satoshi Nakamoto releasing the white paper on the cryptography email list. There's the cryptography mailing list, of course, on Halloween night, October 31st, 2008. Small niche, email list of cryptographers, and he sent out the white paper that changed the world. Bitcoin, P2P electronic cash, right? Digital cash. And it was just a dude who sent out this 9-page document that changed the world. Very understated announcement, but the one that started it all. So I don't think I can go wrong with that one. And you got.
I was going to say, like, Dennis, what's it like explaining a Satoshi Nakamoto concept to a legislator that is not, digital native or understands, the anonymity and like why that's powerful?
Well, we certainly, when it comes to Satoshi and the white paper, something that we always try to talk about is just how incredible it is that even though it was launched by one person, that it has branched out and now it is a community project. And so we also try to highlight that it doesn't really matter who Satoshi is anymore because, we are all Satoshi at this point. So I definitely agree. That's, certainly that's probably the most important announcement. But I didn't want to steal it from you. I felt like you were going to go with that one.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. But yes, I'm glad it's in the top 3. Very important. And so one that goes right along with it. So it's a snake draft. So I get to pick twice here. And I am going to have to go with the most famous Bitcoin tweet of all time, Running Bitcoin by Hal Finney, published on January 11th, 2009, just 8 days after the protocol was launched on January 3rd, 2009. And of course, Hal Finney, they made the first Bitcoin transaction with Satoshi. And this was the first time that someone signaled out into the world that they were actually running the protocol themselves. They were running a Bitcoin node. He received 10 Bitcoin that day from Satoshi when he announced to the world that he was running Bitcoin. And with those 2 words, how many likes does that tweet get? Just every single year, everybody reposts it. But it just the foresight and being able to be a part of this revolution from the very beginning. Hats off to Hal Finney, the Finney family, who carries on his message and legacy in a strong way. And yes, I have to go with Running Bitcoin tweet as my number 2 biggest announcement in Bitcoin history.
All right, we're going to take it to the total other side, what you could call the dark side. The biggest announcement, I think it's also one of the most entertaining sagas. Craig Wright, I am Satoshi.
Oh,
saga of a 2024 court in the UK High Court finding that, hey, you're not Satoshi. We're gonna sit down and you imagine a stodgy old British judge saying, sir, you're not Satoshi Nakamoto, talking to like a white Australian man. Satoshi Nakamoto, obviously a Japanese name. It's just a whole circus in itself. Like, I think that's just just very fascinating on the fact that, like, how do you take yourself seriously and say, hey, I'm Satoshi Nakamoto, but then not be able to like do the thing everyone's going to ask you to do, which is spend from the wallet that is Satoshi's wallet. Like, there's no reason. I don't know, but the people out like that are sociopaths just don't understand that. I don't know, Dennis, if you have a different take on Craig that's more nuanced than what I know as more of a pleb, but yeah, I think the whole Craig Wright thing is entertaining.
I'm proud to say I know very little about Craig Wright.
Probably
never met him, never interacted with him, but definitely love the story. Also, the Peter McCormick part of the thing was interesting. Unfortunately, he got sued by him, but that was a fun story to follow.
Crazy saga. Shout out to Peter McCormick and Hoddle Knott, who had to go through years of lawfare and spending money in order to defeat this case. But the justice won. It was a good story when it comes to the courts here. They were able to put up the evidence, and lots of people contributed their time, their efforts, their money to make sure that this case was funded. It had the right lawyers, and they were able to clear the names of Hodel Knott and Peter McCormick and make sure that Craig Wright, it was clear. The judge said, "You are not Satoshi Nakamoto," and that was the answer that we wanted there. So good one, nice, Craig Wright. All right, Dennis, you're up next. You get to do 2 in a row here. It is a snake draft, so next
right.
2 picks.
That's right. All right, so this next one I think is important because a lot of people talk about Bitcoin needing to be money and be able to be used for daily transactions, but this is what actually helped us to get there, or most of the way there. And that's why I'm going to be picking the launch of the Lightning Network as my second choice, really helping to achieve the underlying theory that we can buy coffee with Bitcoin. I mean, when I found Bitcoin in 2017, 2018, it was all anybody was talking about was how we can't use Bitcoin for coffee, and the Lightning Network helped totally destroy one of the most persistent ways of attacking Bitcoin, and the reason why so many other launches of copycat fake Bitcoins were attempted. So I definitely would put Lightning Network there. For my 4th pick, I gotta say we gotta go institutional with it. We gotta go with the ETF launch. The launch of the ETF. I think a lot of people doubted whether we'd ever get there, and I think it really went to show that Bitcoin has finally graduated and has gone to college, or maybe found its first job, so to speak, and that it is an institutional asset with institutional interest. And not only was the ETF launched, which was massive historically, but it was also the most successful ETF launch in history. So big props to all of the people that put an incredible amount of time and energy into making that happen.
Can't go wrong with that one. And the last 2 years, I mean, it's really been the institutional story. If you just look at all the flows, of course, the first ETF, the fastest to hit $80 billion of assets under management, is BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF. So hard to argue with the importance of such monumental numbers with the ETF launch. Jody.
We're back up next. I know that none of you are going to actually say this, so this is a safe one. I can wait till the end, but this is an entertaining show. This is a podcast. So Charlie Lee selling his Litecoin. I honestly think this was a pivotal moment in orange pilling myself. And for those that aren't aware, early on, Bitcoin's, growing. It's, 2017, it does a, first run up for a lot of people that came into the space, 3,000, 5,000, et cetera, goes, 10,000, 15,000 plus. And at the time, no one really knew about, altcoins, where they fit in, what's appropriate. Like, is it just like metals? Is there a gold, which is Bitcoin? Is there a silver, which at the time was considered Litecoin, like a faster transactions, a little lightweight, not as big a store of value as Bitcoin. And in 2017, near the top, Charlie Lee, the creator of Litecoin, says, "I have sold and donated all my LTC. I'm still working on the project. I am committed to Litecoin, but this allows me to, step away and not have a monetary aspect to like how I work on it." Ultimate top signal since then it's been called. I think what really came out of that, and I haven't really spent time following Charlie Lee like closely since then. But I think the whole thing of Satoshi Nakamoto not being part of Bitcoin and being anonymous, this is the foil to that. This is a lesson showing that people are creating money out of thin air in these altcoins, and then they're just walking away at the top. And he sold it for fiat, and then that was his end game. I don't know if he intended for that, but he walked away with cash and didn't give back to the community after that, with the enormous amounts of money he printed out of thin air. So suddenly you have a ton of Litecoin holders that think they have the silver to Bitcoin's gold, but they don't. Litecoin's just gone down over time, and it's never reclaimed any sort of use or value that it had at that peak.
Good counter signal, yes. And I think he had an interview last year where he said that if he had just not got involved with Litecoin and just bought Bitcoin, his life would be much better off. So there's that. Nice. All right. I am going to add some more levity to this situation. I think one of the most iconic announcements in all of Bitcoin history was Roger Ver's Mt. Gox is not insolvent. If there's a definition of a hostage video, it is there, Roger Ver, sitting in the offices of Mt. Gox in Japan in 2013, telling the people who 70% of Bitcoin was going through Mt. Gox at that time. And he had to sit there and read a script that looked like a hostage video saying that Mt. Gox is not insolvent, that the problems of withdrawals are being worked on and everything's fine. Of course, it reminds you of the everything is fine dog meme. And this was Bitcoin Jesus at the time, right? He was the man, the face of this open protocol. And the truth was that 850,000 Bitcoin were already gone at the time of him saying this. So yeah, really quite the video. Definitely something that people should go and check out if you've never seen it before. Very iconic moment. And it just goes to show you Bitcoin has been through so much, right? I mean, it's just 17 years old, and yet it has seen so many ups and downs, so many euphoric highs and catastrophic lows, and yet it continues to grow and build and get stronger. And then we can look back on these moments a decade later that seemed like death knells at the time and realize, oh, it's all in good fun. It was all a good time, right? Same as like with FTX now. We can look back on the Tom Brady commercials with SBF and be like, oh, that was a top signal if you ever saw one, right? It's pretty funny looking back on it, but no, all good. All's well that ends well. And so far, Bitcoin is doing just fine, despite Mt. Gox and FTX blowing up. Nice. Okay, and then for my next one, I'm gonna have to go with UASF BIP 148 Flag Day, August 1st, 2017, when the node runners stood up and showed that, hey, this oligarchy, these corporations, Coinbase, DCG, you guys do not run Bitcoin, the users do. And so people flagging, signaling that they would not go for bigger blocks, that they would go with SegWit. This was a huge announcement and one that shows the people power of the Bitcoin node runners and the ability for it to be resistant to corporate capture. So that is my list, ladies and gentlemen.
Block size awards. We need I think people have to be educated on that every like 2 years. I think it's super important to understand the core versus nots is almost just like this like rehashing of these different sides that come about, but it's healthy. And I think that all the fears that happened afterwards, they were fine. And we worked it out. Bitcoin kept running. And there's a lot of really good reasons that keeping small blocks and having more node runners that are independent is very healthy for the system.
100%. All right, Jody, how are you going to close it out?
So this one, I'm going to go a little bit different on this one. I am going to go Jack Dorsey. I'm leaving Twitter to focus on Bitcoin. I think this honestly, this is underrated. This is for the audience. Like this is an underrated moment, I think, in history, because at least in Bitcoin history, if you didn't have this moment, Elon would have never bought Twitter, right? Like it would still be run. It would still be this behemoth of a company. No one knows how to value. Is like Twitter profitable? No, but like it's super, there's a ton of engagement, daily active users. And so Twitter as a company, now X, the one that we're streaming to right now, is in a totally different spot. I think there's a really good, they needed the refresh of just like, woke like censorship on speech. We went into election and you needed platforms pushing for that. You really didn't have like the Blue Skies or the, Truth Socials that were really taking off. They were very much echo chambers. I think Twitter still has a good representation of Democrats and Republicans in different sides, different countries. We have people in the chat right now talking about earlier that, USA wants to dominate everything in a very imperialistic way, but that's good. That's free speech. So I think that was really good from purely the Twitter side, but then also we look at Bitcoin. I think one of the most impactful things is certainly, 19 million merchants that use Square that were able to turn on and accept Bitcoin without downloading or buying new hardware. Like that's real adoption. That's a real like Trojan horse way to suddenly Bitcoin's really easy. It's handling your taxes, handling all like the reconciliation and true ups in your accounting that no one wants to do. And that's the biggest friction point for a lot of these small businesses. It's just dealing with these tiny attractions like we talked about the de minimis. So I think, Jack Dorsey, we don't always see as being like the white knight. He's not always, doing things that we think are logical, but super, super impactful decision.
Yeah. Yeah, couldn't agree more. That is a big one that I wouldn't have thought of, especially him like leaving it all behind to go focus on Bitcoin. I think is the centering point, and also the results that have been generated from it. Well, my last one here is going to be tough. I was thinking it through, but I'm definitely going to have to go with Soft War. Jason Lowery putting his thesis out to much division in the community over this theory and this thesis that I think shattered for a lot of people the way that they think about Bitcoin and what Bitcoin can be used for. And when I say Bitcoin, I think more in this instance, I think of the Bitcoin network and the ability to have it be used as a way to communicate and to be able to do so at any given time, anywhere across the world, regardless of whether China might be trying to hack into your communications technology. You can't hack Bitcoin. So I think that's a really powerful one that got out there. Really glad to see that he did, and yeah, looking forward to seeing what's next from Jason Lowery.
Do you talk about the software thesis in DC at all? Does that
Yes.
angle come up? Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Nice. Well, yeah.
It's
I mean,
if you go look at the article, I sort of, on Mind in America on my Twitter right now, I touch on it. I don't talk a lot about it, but I definitely touch on the national security implications of having Bitcoin in a Bitcoin reserve, and also having hash rate here in the United States.
absolutely, yeah. And in terms of the software announcement, I mean, Jason Lowery, when he first announced his book and his thesis, I mean, I remember him. He was like purposely like egging people on and like agitating people. He was like doing a social experiment on the Bitcoin Twitter network and saying like who he could rile up to get his message out there, and it worked. Like that was the talk of the town for months on end. His software thesis, and then he got involved, of course, with some position in the government and had to stop talking about software and took that book down. But the idea lives on, which is very interesting and great to see. And he made some tweets recently about Bitcoin and showing its importance to the U.S. government and making them realize that we should be working on quantum resistance for Bitcoin because of its importance to this country and its national security. So still, I believe lots going on there behind the scenes that we probably aren't privy to on Bitcoin Twitter. But it's interesting to hear you, Dennis, say that you use his framing as a way to communicate to lawmakers about it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for them to understand, and I think there's going to be I think there's going to be some interesting developments coming in the coming months, in the coming years, as people continue to explore that thesis.
Wonderful. Wow. Look at this. Look at this Mount Rushmore, biggest Bitcoin announcements of all time. I think we got a lot of the most important ones there.
Who votes?
Charlie,
How do you choose who wins?
well, you're the guest. You automatically win, but you get to pick between Jody and I. Who do you think has the better list there?
Oh, don't
Roger
make me pick
Fierce,
between
Charlie.
the hosts. Yeah, I mean, phew. Yeah, they're pretty close. I think I'm going to have to go with Rob, though, with the white paper, though. The foundational announcement, and also the running Bitcoin, great combo. And I was born in the block size wars, so it's a very fond, I wouldn't say fond memory, but certainly was what really sort of got me paying attention to the online community very rapidly. When I just came around because I had heard of it for the first time in 2017, and I started studying it and thought this is really cool technology and could solve a lot of the world's problems. I had no idea that that Bitcoin goes up or down in price a lot. I had no idea there was an online community. So the block size wars was was like, whoa, this is really like a global community that is hotly debating these issues. And in a weird way, the long tail of it all is that the block size wars was really a policy debate in Bitcoin. It was a decision over, are we going to have small blocks or big blocks? But that's all in the code. That's all policy that's built into Bitcoin. So in a very counterintuitive way, that was my first foyer into a real true policy debate. No, I wouldn't say I engaged in debate, but I was certainly had my own opinions and I was monitoring the situation probably more than I should have been. But it was my sort of first like up close and personal caring and looking at a piece of policy. And now I do that more on the government side. I have tried to do that a little bit in the Bitcoin space, but I find my time to be much more productive doing it on the Bitcoin side, where we've proven that time and time again we can help get legislation across the finish line. So block size wars, knots versus core, all fun. I like to monitor from the sidelines for the most part.
Yeah, there's never a dull moment, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoiners is that we disagree on almost everything except for consensus rules, and that's what makes this whole entire operation work here and gives us a groundwork to continue on. And TikTok next block, Bitcoin doesn't stop, and one man in Bitcoin that definitely doesn't stop is Dennis Porter. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and excited to see what you do on Capitol Hill in the coming months ahead.
I'm super bullish on what we're doing here at Satoshi Action, and Mind in America is just the first step. And I really appreciate your guys' support and letting me come on here and rant and rave about this policy, which I think will be super important for folks here in America and also become a model for other countries as well.
Yeah, we need to know. Not everyone knows about de minimis tax exemptions, why it matters. Things change. And I think the delta is where people really miss. Like, nobody wants to be plugged in. I mean, people are plugged in 24/7, but it's really hard these days. A lot of people are like opting out and touching grass. And so we appreciate jumping back in and having people catch us up in a very simplified way. Before we get off, we're going to give a shout out to our friends at Arch. We're actually going to do a little bit different this day. Today, I want to talk about, during our Stack and Sip event with Arch, we've been putting out some content from it. The most interesting conversation was around high net worth individuals are coming to Arch to borrow at 8.49%. They take the cash from that and they're going out and buying Stretch, which is Strategy's product, to get 11.49% dividend paid monthly. This is not financial advice, but it's fascinating. This is how TradFi is going to interact with Bitcoin, whether we like it or not. Saylor can do his thing. It's capitalism. Arch is providing loans at lower rates. They are a sponsor, but I think it's interesting when millionaires are like, oh, I'm going to take a little 3% ARB. And when the wealthy are doing it, pay attention, learn, understand why they're doing something like that. And we'll try to break it down further for you.
Carry trades pay. Yeah, check out archlending.com/dailystack. And you'll get a point off your interest rate with Arch. Absolutely cool stuff. And so again, we got to shout out the youtube.com/dailystack live. Go join the community there. And if you want to win 21,000 Bitcoin, use code word USA in honor of our guest today, Dennis Porter, at 21race.com/stack. Enter into the competition. We'll spin the wheel and we'll see who wins that 21,000 sats. Cheers, everybody. What a great one. Head off into this holiday weekend with your head held high, knowing that Bitcoin policy is in the right hands and that Bitcoin, no matter what, is going to keep marching on. Thank you so much for joining us.